Hello.
Hi, Fiona.
We're here again.
Yes, indeed.
We've done these before, but it's just you and me this time.
It is.
Because we were so good last time. They
Absolutely.
were like, bring out the professionals. Get Nicky and Fiona talking about something that our phone has been ringing more about, hasn't it, recently? Heading towards the summer holidays.
Holiday season.
People starting to think about travelling, summer holidays, taking the children abroad.
Absolutely.
And it's quite a seasonal inquiry, I would say, but one that is important, and that is the issue of passports.
Yeah.
We are going to be talking about children's passports in the context of parents who are living in two separate houses. So you've got separate parents living in separate houses, both parents probably in turn wanting to travel with that child and needing a passport to do so. Because it should be quite straightforward. You need a passport to travel. Most people have got them. Sounds really easy. Everybody wants to holiday. It's a benefit to everyone going on holiday.
Yeah.
So it should be quite straightforward. What's there to argue about? But actually it can cause quite a lot of stress, can't it? Passport applications, travel abroad, who keeps the passport. And so we thought it'd be quite a good thing to talk about and hopefully helpful as well. You need to apply for a passport. It's the first thing.
Yeah.
Who can do that for a child?
Absolutely.
We're talking about, aren't we?
No, of course. So obviously an application for a passport needs to be done by the parents. So by the mother or the father, or the mother and mother, or father in same-sex situations. And that application needs to be made by, as I said, the parents who have parental responsibility. It's the fact that they have parental responsibility that means that they can apply for the passport in the first place. And the people that have parental responsibility for a child, so a mother will always have parental responsibility for a child that they've given birth to, and fathers typically will as well. So for example, if they're married to the mother, or their name's on the birth certificate, which they typically would be, then they would also automatically have parental responsibility.
So parental responsibility is a legal kind of right, isn't it? It's a thing. It's not just a phrase you're using. No. It is a thing.
Absolutely. Parental responsibility is the thing that gives a parent the rights and responsibilities. The fact it is called parental responsibility, it's those responsibilities you have to your child to make decisions, all sorts of decisions about that child, about their where they go to school, about where they live, about medical decisions, all that sort of stuff. Those decisions are made by that person with parental responsibility. Exactly.
And applying for a passport is included within that responsibility. Absolutely, that you have. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So it can, as I said, it can be done by anyone with parental responsibility. But the key thing is that both parents need to consent to that. And so I suppose, what happens if they don't consent? So if one parent says, well, I don't want to get a passport in England because, I'm French and I want my child to have a French passport, for example.
Yeah, so you should only ever, as a parent, am I right in saying, apply for a passport when you know that you've got the other person's agreement to it? You shouldn't just be going off making an application for a passport thinking, I've got him first.
No.
That means I've done the right thing here because it's working out for me. You should make sure that you know that you've got the other person's okay.
Absolutely, you should. And it will, ensuring that you do have that consent will avoid problems down the line as well.
Yes, yeah. So if you don't have that other person's agreement, what can you do? I guess you can ask them for it initially, can't you? And see whether they'll talk it out with you and talk it through. We'd
try and reach an agreement in the first instance.
Yeah.
And try and understand the reasons why, for example, if you're applying for a British passport because you want to take your child abroad, try and understand the reason why they don't want that child to have a British passport. It might be that there's a really legitimate reason that it's better for them to have a passport in a different passport, and that, dual passports aren't allowed in that other country. So there might be a really sort of specific reason why actually with the particular dynamics of that particular family, it is better for the child not to have a British passport and they should have a passport from another country. But you need to understand and, where the other person's coming from and what their arguments are.
Yeah. And I suppose there might be concerns that the child will then travel, and perhaps those concerns could be that the child is just going to miss some schooling, if in fact they're going to be taken out of school to travel, or it could be something more serious like child abduction, not going to come back. So there could be some concerns that are someone's racing ahead with, but they are stopping that sort of passport application. Yeah. So again, important to address those, really.
Absolutely. I mean, that's probably one of the key areas that sort of occupies our time when we're approached by clients who come to Harbour Family Law about passport issues. It's the issue of I want to travel abroad. So I suppose as a starting point, you need the other parent's consent in order to travel abroad. So in order to take your child out of the country, there needs to be both parents' agreement. So you can't just take your child out of the country. In order to do that, you need the other parent's consent. And, what do you do if the other parent says no? And as you said, there can be different reasons. It could be as simple as you're planning to take our child out, during term time because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
But you fundamentally think that the education of the child is more important. So you might disagree on that basis. Or it could be a more serious concern, and that you are worried that they are originally from a different country, they're seeking to take the child on holiday to that country, and then there's a real risk of them not returning and a risk of child abduction. So there can be a whole sort of spectrum, really, in terms of these sorts of disagreements that can arise, and why people might legitimately and not legitimately withhold their consent.
And if you've got a situation like that, then it will be a question of trying to resolve it outside of the court system. But eventually, if you can't, it'll be a question of making an application to court for permission to remove the child from, in our case, England and Wales, and travel abroad.
Absolutely. So ultimately, if you want to go on a holiday and the other parent says no, then you would have to make an application to the court. And in that situation, the court would look at the situation in the round and see what is in that child's best interests. And the reality is, I don't know if this is your experience, but certainly my experience is that the courts will almost always allow the holiday to take place unless there are serious concerns about the reason for the holiday, for example.
Yeah, I would say I agree with that. So generally the courts will support travel, won't they? They will support international travel. Absolutely. And look at the benefit of travel really as being something that's in the child's best interest. And if there is some persuasive argument as to why that isn't in the child's best interest, then obviously that needs to be thrashed out. Yeah.
In fact, I had a case once a few years ago where the child was very young. So the child was only, I think, about 4 months, something like that.
Tiny.
A tiny one. And the mother wanted to take the child to America. And the father objected. And I think there was probably a bit more to the objection than simply it being long haul travel. But that was sort of what it was. That was what it was pinned on. But ultimately, the court said, yes, they can go. It was a family holiday, I think possibly with the sort of wedding involved. And they were like, yes, the child's routine will be slightly disrupted by going on a long haul flight. But ultimately, that's a kind of decision that parents can take.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be really for the court or indeed the father to say, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. So we probably should just add, shouldn't we, that if you've got a court order that confirms the child lives with you, I don't think you need the other parent's permission to remove the child for over 28 days. If you're going for under 28 days, then you can go without permission.
That's right, Fiona. So if you've been unfortunate enough to have to go to court previously in order to get a child arrangements order, which is basically an order that says where the child lives and how the child spends time between the mother and father. If you have a lives with order in your favour, you can go abroad for up to 28 days without the other parent's consent. The reality is it's always better to get that consent because, you need to put yourself in the other parent's shoes. If your child was going abroad, you would want to know where they're going and where they're staying and where they're flying. In the event of a world disaster and something happens, you would want to know with security, well, I know that my child's not in Italy where there's just been an earthquake, for example. They're in France. And I think generally that communications, and even if you do have a court order, it's always going to be better to sort of fully communicate and obtain that consent.
Yeah. So we've got the passport now. We've been on holiday. Holiday's over. And we've come back.
Yes. So
who gets to keep the passport?
Yeah, we were talking about this. It's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, there isn't an answer per se unless there's a court order.
It can become very hot property, can't it? That passport.
Absolutely.
It's your ticket out of here. Generally, I think if you're the primary carer of that child, then generally I think there would be a sort of legal expectation that you're the person with the passport. Now, nowadays, so many children divide their time between their mum's home and their dad's home equally.
Or close to equally.
Or as close to equally as possible. Question, what about if you're both primary carers? What about if you both? And I think we would often look there like who is responsible for the child's sort of medical records or medical file, or who's taking them to the dentist, who's taking them to the doctor. Generally, there tends to be a parent who's more in charge of that sort of important admin. And I think ideally this is just something that you're going to agree. Absolutely. And try and take out the hot of the property, the hot property, just make it something that actually is for the benefit of the child having a passport.
Absolutely. And I found in quite a lot of my cases, the sort of it's coming to that compromise, but the compromise will often be whoever has last been on holiday will keep that passport until such time as the next person is going on holiday. And then they'll hand it over, say, a month before that next holiday. And you kind of continue on that sort of basis, because that almost means that it doesn't, ultimately the passport is the child's passport. It doesn't belong to the mother. You're right. Yeah. It's the child's passport. And so if you have that kind of situation where both parents feel like they have the passport some of the time, it stops it. I think parents are sometimes worried that the other parent will use it as a form of control and as a reason to stop a holiday from happening. And if you can kind of try and take that away from it, then that can, ultimately really help the situation, can't it?
Yes, and it does bring us back to a very key principle, which is that children do not suffer from their parents being separated, but they do suffer when there's conflict.
Absolutely.
And in something that is a luxury, such as a holiday and a happy time and a benefit, I think it would be really good if parents could remember that and, not sort of weaponize a child's passport. Try and share it, try and come to agreement. Yeah.
But Fiona, what would you do if you are about to go on holiday? You're about to go on holiday next week, you're off to the Caribbean, and the other parent is annoyed about something, or for whatever reason, they say, well, I'm not going to hand over the passport. Point blankly, I'm not going to do it. What would you do in that situation?
You would need to make a court application. Yeah, and the court will decide. And I think I would say what we've just touched on earlier, that the court is supportive of travel, generally what's in the best interest of the child. So you do need to have a think about the longer term consequences of some things you're doing, and somebody having to make a court application when there's already a holiday coming. It's quite clearly a holiday. There's a return flight booked. There's no chance of abduction, things like that. The court, I think, would take a dim view of somebody just being
refusing for
awkward.
Refusing's sake.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly. And often, I've certainly had it. If there is an imminent holiday that has been booked, you can get an urgent hearing. It's hard to get urgent hearings as a general rule, but in that situation, that is one of the situations where the court, it is urgent because you're going on holiday in a week or two's time, and the court generally would deal with that on an urgent basis.
Yes. And also it would consider future-proofing, wouldn't it? So it doesn't happen again. Yeah. And perhaps you'd find yourself with an order saying that the other parent has the passport 100% of the time, so it's prevent sort of thing. So, there are consequences of that sort of behaviour that would be frowned upon, I think. Yeah.
One of the other things I think we kind of had to think about is that, and this is certainly something that I have often been asked by clients, is that really practical thing of, you're not married, but you have a child together. And as the mother, your child has the father's surname. And so you have an entirely different surname to your child. And that whole sort of issue of, you're going on holiday, you're all excited, and then you get to passport control, and the passport control says, well, who is this child, and all the rest of it. And I think it can just be, this is where we've talked about the fact that you need the consent, but this is where it's perhaps even more important, if you do have a different surname to your child, to make sure that you just have that evidence, just have that letter from the other parent saying that they consent, and then have a photocopy of the child's birth certificate, and potentially have a sort of photocopy of your partner's birth certificate as well, just to sort of do it in the round so that it's very clear to passport control that this is what the situation is.
Yes.
And it just helps to avoid sort of there being issues and conflict, really.
Yeah. I mean, lots of people have different surnames, don't they, now, from family that they're travelling with. Yeah. So to evidence that and explain why you do is a really, really good top tip.
Yeah. The reality is, we don't want to panic people. It actually happens incredibly rarely. I have been asked that question many, many times by clients. What should I do? How should I protect myself? When I ask them, have you been stopped before? What's been the outcome? I've actually never had a client who's actually been challenged at passport control. So I think people should be reassured it isn't something that happens, but of course they do it sometimes. And if you don't, it just removes the anxiety. If you just have that evidence there, you need the consent anyway. You're not, you shouldn't be traveling abroad without the other parent's consent. But if you have the evidence, it just really removes.
Yes, it's a really secure position that you find yourself in then, isn't it? So I think it's a really good top tip. And the other top tip we spoke about when we were getting ready for this podcast was, if you have a parent who is refusing to hand over the passport because they're being, let's say, awkward, it's really important you do not report that passport as stolen.
Absolutely.
Because it's not stolen.
And it isn't.
And it's really important you don't report it as lost, because it's not lost. Yeah. And you yourself could find yourself in sort of trouble for having falsely reported it, stolen or lost.
You would be giving false information to the passport.
Yeah, and I think it's called malicious cancellation. Yes. I think when you say it's stolen, it's lost, I don't know, but actually you do know that the other parent has it and they're just refusing to hand it over.
And your recourse then would be to go to court, as we talked about.
Yes. So it's really important you don't do that, otherwise you can find yourself in trouble. So that's another top tip.
Absolutely.
Really. Yeah.
Well, we hope those tips and have assisted in terms of issues surrounding passports and sort of demystified some of the issues surrounding this. As always, if you have any queries arising from our Harbour Family Law podcast, please do get in contact with us. We offer a free initial telephone call, and we're always here and happy to assist.
And in the meantime, bon voyage.
Yes, enjoy your holiday.